He called her just a wife until his business collapsed, and he discovered she held all the power. The first time I heard silence, really heard it, was on a Tuesday evening in October. Not the comfortable kind that wraps around you like a blanket, but the deafening type that follows after you've said something you can never take back. I stood in my apartment in downtown Boston, the phone still warm in my hand, my reflection fractured in the window that overlooked the city. Behind the glass, countless lights twinkled like fallen stars, but all I could focus on was the hollow space where my brother's voice had been moments before. "Let me help you, Nathan," I had pleaded, my voice cracking with desperation. "Just tell me where you are." His response still echoed in my head. "Some things can't be fixed, Alex. Some people can't be saved." Then came that awful click, followed by this suffocating silence. I'm a trauma surgeon at Massachusetts General Hospital. My entire career is built on fixing things that seem beyond repair, on saving people who others might give up on. But right now, standing in my living room with my brother's words ringing in my ears, I felt completely powerless. The city lights blurred as I pressed my forehead against the cool glass. 3 years ago, when I moved to Boston for my residency, I thought I was running toward something. Success, purpose, a chance to make a difference. Now I wondered if I had just been running away from the mess I'd left behind in Chicago, from Nathan, from the truth about what happened the night our parents died. My phone buzzed again, and for a moment, hope fluttered in my chest. But it was just a text from the hospital. Multiple trauma incoming. All hands on deck. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep trying Nathan's number until he picked up. But I knew better. In my line of work, minutes can mean the difference between life and death. I grabbed my keys and jacket, muscle memory taking over as I headed for the door. The elevator was out of order, again, so I took the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the stairwell. 17 floors down, each step a reminder of how far I'd climbed in my career, and how far I'd fallen in the ways that really mattered. The night air hit me like a slap, carrying the scent of approaching rain and exhaust fumes. As I walked the 6 blocks to Mass General, my mind kept circling back to Nathan's voice, to the emptiness I'd heard there. He'd always been the stronger one, the steady presence I could count on after our parents died. What had changed? What had I missed while I was building my perfect life in Boston? The emergency department was chaos when I arrived. Dr. Sarah Chen, my colleague and closest friend in Boston, met me at the entrance, her dark hair escaping from its usually neat bun. "Multi-vehicle pileup on I-93, she explained as we walked briskly toward the trauma bay. "A first ambulance is 3 minutes out." I nodded, pushing thoughts of Nathan to the back of my mind as I pulled on a trauma gown and gloves. This was what I was good at, working under pressure, making split-second decisions that could save lives. Here, in the controlled chaos of the ER, everything made sense. Everything had a solution. The automatic doors hissed open, and the first stretcher rolled in. John Doe, approximately 30 years old, heavy internal bleeding, possible head trauma. The paramedic rattled off, BP dropping, lost consciousness en route. I stepped forward, ready to do what I did best. But as I reached for the patient's wrist to check his pulse, I froze. Through the blood and bruising, I recognized the small tattoo on his forearm, a compass rose, identical to the one Nathan and I had gotten together on his 18th birthday. "I'm Alex." Sarah's voice seemed to come from far away. "Alex, we need you here." The monitoring equipment started beeping urgently. The patient, my brother, was crashing, and I stood there, paralyzed by the weight of all my mistakes, all the things left unsaid between us. In that moment, as the chaos of the trauma bay swirled around me, I realized that sometimes the hardest person to save isn't the one lying on the table in front of you. It's yourself. Time has a strange way of bending in an operating room. Seconds stretch into hours when you're racing against death, and hours compress into moments when you're winning. Right now, standing over my brother's broken body, time wasn't just bending, it was shattering. BP's dropping again. A nurse called out. 80 over 40. My hands moved automatically, decades of training taking over where emotion failed me. The metallic smell of blood mixed with antiseptic filled my nostrils, a scent so familiar I usually didn't notice it anymore. But today, knowing it was Nathan's blood coating my gloves, every detail felt razor sharp. "More suction," I commanded, my voice steadier than I felt. "There's another bleeder behind the liver." The overhead lights caught the silver instruments in my hands. sending brief flashes across the surgical field like lightning in a storm-dark sky. Sarah stood across from me, her eyes meeting mine over her surgical mask. She knew who was on our table. I'd managed to tell her that much before we started. But she hadn't hesitated, hadn't questioned whether I should be operating. Instead, she'd simply said, "Then we'd better not lose him." The monitor's rhythmic beeping faltered, then quickened. "Vitach," someone announced. The room tensed, everyone poised for what might come next. "Not today, Nathan," I muttered, working faster. "You don't get to check out like this." My mind flashed back to the last time I'd seen him before tonight, 3 years ago in Chicago. We'd fought in the kitchen of our childhood home, the morning sun casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. "You're running away," he'd accused, his words sharp with anger and something else. Disappointment, maybe. "Just like you ran away the night they died." "I wasn't running away," I'd protested. "I was 16, Nathan. What was I supposed to do?" "You were supposed to be there." The coffee mug he'd been holding shattered against the wall, making us both jump. In the silence that followed, he'd looked at the dark liquid dripping down the faded wallpaper and whispered, "I was there. I was always there." The memory dissolved as the monitors screamed for attention. "V-fib!" The high-pitched alarm cut through the operating room's focused quiet. "No pulse. Starting chest compressions," Sarah announced, already moving. "Push one of epi." I watched my brother's heart on the monitor, its chaotic rhythm mocking every oath I'd ever taken as a doctor. The first rule they teach you in medical school is never to treat family. Now I understood why. Every compression Sarah performed felt like it was crushing my own chest. "Clear!" The defibrillator whined as it charged. Nathan's body arched off the table with the shock, then fell back limply. No change. "Again," I ordered, even as memories flooded my mind. Nathan teaching me to ride a bike. Nathan standing between me and the school bullies. Nathan holding me the night our parents died, promising we'd get through it together. All the times he'd saved me. And now, when it mattered most, I couldn't seem to save him. "Dr. Walker," Sarah's voice cut through my thoughts. "Alex, you need to call it." I looked at the monitor, at the stubborn line that refused to show the rhythm we needed. My surgical gown felt too tight, the mask suffocating. The room seemed to spin slightly, the bright lights blurring at the edges. "Time of death." The words stuck in my throat like shards of glass. "I've got it," Sarah said quietly. "A time of death, 2347. The room emptied slowly, the team filing out with the heavy silence that always follows a lost patient. Soon it was just me, Sarah, and the shell of my brother on the table. I couldn't move, couldn't look away from his face, now peaceful in a way it hadn't been in years. "Alex," Sarah's hand on my arm was gentle but firm. "There was too much damage. You did everything you could." Did I? The question echoed in my head as I finally stepped back from the table. Had I done everything I could? Not just tonight, but for the past 3 years, for the past decade. I stripped off my gloves and gown mechanically, letting them fall to the floor. The surgical sink beckoned, and I scrubbed my hands raw under scalding water, watching Nathan's blood swirl down the drain. The last time I'd seen this much blood was the night of the accident that killed our parents. I'd walked away from that too, hadn't I? "I need to call Chicago PD, I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. His wallet was empty. No ID, no phone. They need to know he's here. "That can wait until morning," Sarah replied. "You need to rest." But rest was the last thing I needed. Because in the growing quiet of the empty OR, with the monitors finally silent and the overhead lights humming their steady rhythm, I could hear it again, that awful silence from my phone call with Nathan. Only now I understood what it really was. It wasn't just silence. It was a goodbye. The morgue at Mass General is in the basement, 5 floors below the surgical wing. I'd been there countless times before, but never like this. Never for family. The elevator descended with a gentle hum, each floor passing like a year falling away, taking me back to another basement, another night when death had changed everything. "You don't have to do this now," Sarah said, standing beside me in the elevator. She hadn't left my side since the OR, as if afraid I might shatter if left alone. Maybe she was right. "Yes, I do." The doors opened to a familiar corridor, its fluorescent lights casting a sickly pallor over the mint-green walls. I need to know what he was carrying, why he was here in Boston. The morgue attendant, Dave, looked up from his crossword puzzle as we entered. Recognition flickered across his face. He and I had worked together often enough, but something in my expression made him swallow whatever greeting he'd been about to offer. "And the John Doe from the I-93 accident," I said, my voice clinical, detached. "I need to see his personal effects." Dave nodded, reaching under his desk for a clear plastic bag. "Not much there, Doc. No wallet, like you said. Just some clothes, a key, and this." He held up a crumpled piece of paper, protected in its own smaller bag. My hands trembled slightly as I took it. The paper was torn from a notebook, the edges ragged. On it, in Nathan's familiar scrawl, was an address in South Boston, and a single word, "Remember." "Alex?" Sarah's voice seemed to come from far away. "What is it?" I pocketed the paper, not ready to share its mystery. "I need to see him." Dave hesitated. "Dr. Walker, hospital policy. Please." The word came out raw, desperate. "He's my brother." Understanding dawned on Dave's face, followed quickly by sympathy. He led us through the double doors into the main morgue, the temperature dropping noticeably. The sound of our footsteps echoed off the tiled walls as we approached one of the steel drawers. The sheet covering Nathan's body was stark white against the metal table. Dave stepped back, giving me space as I reached for it with unsteady hands. Sarah's presence behind me was solid, grounding, as I pulled the sheet back. Nathan's face was peaceful, the lines of anger and pain that had marked our last meeting smoothed away. Someone had cleaned away the blood and closed his eyes. If I didn't look at the sutured incision I'd made trying to save him, I could almost pretend he was sleeping. "You stubborn idiot," I whispered, touching his cold cheek. "What were you trying to tell me?" The key in the plastic bag caught my eye. It was old, brass, the kind used for storage units or old buildings, not a car key or house key. Another piece of the puzzle Nathan had brought with him to Boston. A memory surfaced, sharp and unwanted. Nathan at 18, standing in our parents' bedroom the day after the funeral. He'd been going through Dad's desk while I sat on the bed, numb with grief. "There's something you need to know," he'd said, turning to face me with a similar key in his hand. But before he could continue, our aunt had called us downstairs, and the moment was lost. I'd left for college 2 weeks later. By the time I came home for Thanksgiving, the desk was gone, and Nathan never mentioned that day again. "I need to go." I pulled the sheet back over Nathan's face, my decision crystallizing. "That address in South Boston. I have to check it out. Alex." "No." Sarah caught my arm. "You're in no state to go anywhere. You just lost a patient. Your brother. You need to rest. To process this." "Process what?" My laugh sounded hollow even to my own ears. That my brother died on my table after 3 years of silence. That the last time we spoke, he was trying to tell me something important. Or maybe I should process how he ended up in Boston, of all places, with nothing but a cryptic note and a key. "At least let me come with you," she pleaded. I shook my head. "I need to do this alone." The weight of the paper in my pocket seemed to grow heavier. "But I need another favor. Can you cover my shifts for the next few days? Tell Dr. Reeves it's a family emergency." Sarah studied my face for a long moment before nodding. 48 hours. That's all you get before I come looking for you." The ride back up to ground level was silent. My mind raced through possibilities, trying to connect the fragments Nathan had left behind. The key, the address, his final phone call. They had to mean something. And underneath it all ran a current of guilt, of questions I'd been avoiding for 10 years. What had Nathan been trying to tell me that day after the funeral? What had he found in Dad's desk? And most importantly, what had really happened the night our parents died? The answer, I was beginning to suspect, lay somewhere in South Boston, waiting to be unlocked. Dawn was breaking over Boston Harbor as I pulled up to the address from Nathan's note. The early morning light painted the old brick buildings in shades of amber and gray, while seagulls wheeled overhead, their cries echoing off weathered walls. This part of South Boston was all abandoned warehouses and forgotten dreams, the kind of place where secrets go to die. I'd gone home long enough to shower and change, but sleep had been impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Nathan on that operating table, or worse, remembered the look on his face the last time we'd spoken in Chicago. The coffee in my cup had gone cold, untouched. The address led to a 5-story warehouse, its windows either boarded up or broken. Faded lettering above the entrance read, Maritime Storage and Trading Co., S.L., 1923. The lock on the front door was new, though, incongruously shiny against the rust-stained metal. The key from Nathan's belongings felt heavy in my hand. Before trying it, I walked the perimeter of the building, noting the fresh tire tracks in the gravel. Someone had been here recently. The back entrance was chained shut, but a side door caught my attention. Its frame showed signs of being recently repaired. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Check in when you can, and be careful." I slipped the phone back into my pocket without responding. The less she knew about what I was doing, the better. The key fit the side door perfectly. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the lingering smell of salt water. Weak sunlight filtered through the grimy windows, creating islands of light in the darkness. My footsteps echoed on the concrete floor as I moved deeper into the building. The ground floor was mostly empty, save for some abandoned shipping crates and rusted machinery. A stairwell in the corner led both up and down. The basement called to me first. Basements seemed to be a theme in my family's history. My phone's flashlight illuminated the way down. Each step creaked under my weight, the sound unnervingly loud in the silence. The temperature dropped as I descended, and that's when another memory hit me. So vivid it made me grab the railing for support. I was 16 again, standing at the top of our basement stairs in Chicago. Mom and Dad were arguing below, their voices muffled but angry. "They can't know," Dad was saying. "It would ruin everything." Then Mom, "There are children. James. They deserve—" The sound of something breaking cut her off. I'd run back to my room, pulled the covers over my head like a child. The next morning, both our parents acted like nothing had happened. They died 3 weeks later. The basement of the warehouse was a maze of storage units, their metal doors lined up like soldiers. Most were secured with padlocks, but one stood partially open, about halfway down the row. As I approached, I noticed fresh scratches around its lock. Someone had forced it, heart pounding. I pulled the door open wider. The beam of my flashlight revealed stacks of boxes and file cabinets. On top of one cabinet lay a manila envelope, conspicuously clean compared to the dust-covered surfaces around it. Inside the envelope were photographs, old Polaroids, their colors faded. My hands shook as I flipped through them. Our father, much younger, standing with 2 other men I didn't recognize. They were in what looked like an office, signing papers. The next photo showed Dad handing one of the men a briefcase. The final image made my blood run cold. The same office, but now ransacked, one of the men lying motionless on the floor. "I was wondering when you'd show up." The voice behind me sent ice through my veins. I spun around, nearly dropping the photos. A man stood in the doorway, his silhouette dark against the dim light from the hallway. Something in his hand caught the beam of my fallen flashlight, the metallic glint of a gun. "Nathan tried to warn you, didn't he?" The man's voice was calm, almost conversational. "Shame about that accident. Wrong place, wrong time. Who are you?" I managed to ask, my mouth dry. "What do you want?" "Want?" He chuckled, stepping closer. "I want you to understand what your father stole from us, what your brother died trying to expose." He gestured with the gun toward the photos in my hand. "Those are just the beginning. The real evidence is in Chicago, where it all started, where it has to end. The accident," I whispered, realization dawning. "Our parents. It wasn't an accident at all, was it? Smart boy. Nathan figured it out too, eventually. Took him years of digging, but he found the truth. He just couldn't prove it. Not without what's hidden in your old house." Footsteps echoed from above, multiple sets, moving quickly. The man cursed under his breath. "Looks like our time's up," he said, backing toward the door. "Your doctor friend called the cops, but this isn't over. Alex, Chicago is waiting." He disappeared into the darkness, his footsteps fading just as shouts of, "Police! Clear the building!" began to fill the warehouse. I stood frozen, the photographs trembling in my hands, as flashlight beams began to sweep the basement. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about that night 10 years ago, was unraveling, and somewhere in Chicago, in the house I'd run away from, lay answers that had already cost Nathan his life. The truth was calling me home. The police station smelled like burnt coffee and old paper. I sat in an interview room, the photographs from the warehouse spread out on the metal table before me, while Detective Martinez asked questions I only half heard. My mind kept returning to the man with the gun, to his casual mention of Nathan's accident. "Dr. Walker," Martinez's voice cut through my thoughts. "You need to tell me why you were in that warehouse." I looked up at her, taking in the concern beneath her professional demeanor. She was good at her job. I could tell by the way she'd arranged the room. positioning herself not across from me but at an angle, non-threatening. The same way I approach scared patients in the ER. "My brother left me an address," I said finally. "Before he died, before he was killed, he was trying to tell me something about our parents. Death. The accident in Chicago 10 years ago." She consulted her notes. "Single-car crash. Both parents pronounced dead at the scene. It wasn't an accident." The words felt strange leaving my mouth, a truth I'd somehow always known but never acknowledged. "Nathan spent years investigating it. These photos," I gestured at the table, "they prove our father was involved in something dangerous." Martinez picked up one of the Polaroids, studying it. "We'll need to keep these as evidence. Have you noticed anyone following you since the warehouse?" I thought about the drive back to the station, how every shadow had seemed to hide a threat. "No," but he said it wasn't over. "That the real evidence is in Chicago. You're not thinking of going there." It wasn't a question. "I have to." I leaned forward, willing her to understand. "Nathan died trying to uncover the truth. I ran away from it once before. I won't do it again." Martinez sighed, closing her notebook. "I'll have officers watch your apartment, but I can't stop you from leaving the state. Just be careful. Men who stage car accidents don't usually leave loose ends." Outside the station, the day had grown hot and humid. Sarah was waiting by her car, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she hadn't slept either. "I'm sorry," she said as I approached. "I had to call them. When you weren't answering your phone, you did the right thing." I managed a weak smile. "But now I need you to do something else for me. You're going to Chicago." It wasn't a question from her either. "I need you to cover for me at the hospital. Tell them." I trailed off, realizing I had no idea how long this might take. I already did. She pulled an envelope from her purse. 2 weeks of emergency leave, approved by Dr. Reeves, and this. She handed me a small package wrapped in brown paper. "And I found it in Nathan's personal effects before they were logged into evidence. I thought you might need it." Inside was a key, old, like the one to the warehouse, but different. With it was a scrap of paper bearing an all-too-familiar address, our childhood home in Chicago. "Sarah," emotion closed my throat. "Just come back alive." She hugged me fiercely. "And call me, damn it. Don't make me send the cops after you again." An hour later, I stood in my apartment, throwing clothes into a duffel bag. The photos from the warehouse kept flashing through my mind. Dad with those men, the ransacked office, the body on the floor. What had he gotten involved in? What had Nathan discovered? My phone rang, an unknown number. For a moment, I just stared at it, remembering Nathan's last call. Finally, I answered. "The photos were just a warning," a familiar voice said. "The man from the warehouse. Your brother made his choice. You still have time to make yours." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Nathan wasn't supposed to die." Something changed in his voice. Regret. Maybe. That wasn't part of the plan. But now things are in motion that can't be stopped. Go home, Alex. Find what your brother hid. But remember, you're not the only one looking. The line went dead. I sat heavily on my bed, the phone still in my hand. On my nightstand, a photo caught my eye. Nathan and me at his high school graduation, his arm around my shoulders, both of us smiling. It was taken 2 years before our parents died, before secrets and silence tore us apart. Standing, I grabbed the photo and added it to my bag. Outside, thunder rumbled, promising a storm. Fitting weather for returning to the scene of a crime I hadn't known was a crime until today. Chicago was waiting, its shadows deep enough to hide decade-old secrets. And somewhere in our old house, Nathan had hidden the truth about our parents' death, a truth someone was willing to kill to protect. I shouldered my bag and headed for the door. It was time to stop running. Chicago hadn't changed, but I had. The familiar skyline rose before me as my rental car crawled through morning traffic, the lake a steel-gray shimmer to the east. Last time I'd driven these streets, I'd been fleeing to Boston, convinced I was leaving the past behind. Now every landmark felt like an accusation. The GPS directed me through Lincoln Park, past the coffee shop where Mom used to grade papers, the park where Dad taught us to throw a baseball. I switched it off. My hands knew the way home. Our house stood exactly as I remembered it. Red brick, white trim, maple tree out front now twice the size it had been. The front steps were cracked in the same places, the iron railing still missing its third spindle, but the windows were dark, the lawn overgrown. No one had lived here since Nathan moved out last year. I sat in the car, watching. The man from the warehouse had said I wasn't the only one looking. but the street was quiet, just a few joggers and dog walkers enjoying the mild spring morning. The key Sarah had found among Nathan's things fit the front door perfectly. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with dust and memories. The furniture was gone. Nathan must have sold it when he moved, but the walls still held the same family photos. Mom and Dad on their wedding day, Nathan and me at the lake, all of us at Disney World. The year before, everything fell apart. I moved through the house like a ghost, touching nothing, remembering everything. The kitchen where we'd had our last fight. The living room where we'd watch the Bears every Sunday. The stairs I'd climbed that night, hearing our parents argue in the basement. The basement. My feet carried me to the door before I could think better of it. The steps creaked in the same places. The handrail still wobbled. At the bottom, I fumbled for the light switch. Nothing happened. "Power's been off for months," a voice said behind me. But I brought a flashlight. I spun around, heart hammering. A woman stood at the top of the stairs, silhouetted against the hallway light. She held up her hands, showing she was unarmed. "Detective Rachel Morgan, Chicago PD. Your friend Dr. Chen called ahead, said you might need some local help. Sarah called the police." I wasn't sure whether to be grateful or annoyed. She called me specifically. Morgan descended the stairs, flashlight beam bouncing. "I worked your parents' case. Never sat right with me, but we couldn't prove anything hinky." She reached the bottom, turning to face me, "Until your brother started digging. Something clicked. Nathan came to you." She nodded, sweeping the flashlight around the basement. It was mostly empty now, just some old shelves and boxes. "About 6 months ago, said he had evidence that your parents' accident wasn't an accident. We were building a case, but then," she trailed off. "And then he died in a convenient car crash." The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. "Nothing convenient about it," Morgan said sharply. "That crash in Boston, 3 other people died, including Tommy Martinez." The name meant nothing to me, but Morgan was already pulling out her phone, showing me a photo. One of the men from the warehouse Polaroids, younger, but unmistakably the same person. "Martinez was a forensic accountant," Morgan explained. "Had ties to some heavy players in Boston and Chicago. Nathan thought he helped your father hide something. Money, maybe, or documents. Something worth killing for." I leaned against the wall, trying to process this. The man at the warehouse, he said Nathan hid evidence here, something that would prove what really happened. Morgan's flashlight beam settled on Dad's old workbench. "And then let's find it." We searched the basement methodically, looking for anything out of place. The workbench yielded nothing. The old shelves were empty. Even the boxes contained only holiday decorations and outgrown clothes. "There has to be something," I muttered, frustration mounting. "Nathan wouldn't have—" I stopped, a memory surfacing. Dad's desk, the key Nathan had found after the funeral, the study, upstairs. We took the stairs 2 at a time. The study was empty now, the desk long gone, but I went straight to the far wall, running my hands over the wood paneling. Help me look for anything unusual. A seam, a catch, something. Morgan's flashlight joined my search. For 10 minutes, we examined every inch of the wall. Just as I was starting to doubt myself, her light caught something. "Here, the panel's different." She was right. One section was a fraction of an inch proud of the others. I pressed it, pushed it, finally found a small depression that yielded under my thumb. With a soft click, the panel swung open. Behind it was a small safe, built into the wall. Old, like the kind you'd find in hotels 50 years ago. The kind that would take a key exactly like the one Nathan had been holding the day after the funeral. "Alex." Morgan's voice was tight with warning. "Someone's coming up the walk." I peered through the grimy window. 2 men in dark suits were approaching the house, their purposeful stride setting off every alarm in my head. As they reached the steps, one of them looked up, and I recognized him from the warehouse photos. The third man, the one who'd been with my father. "Back door," Morgan whispered, already moving. "Now." We made it to the kitchen just as the front door opened. Morgan pulled me into the pantry, closing the door as footsteps entered the house. Through the slats, I watched 2 shadows pass in the hallway. "Check upstairs," a gruff voice ordered. "The safe has to be here somewhere." Morgan's hand found my arm in the darkness, squeezing once. A warning or reassurance. I wasn't sure which, but as the footsteps climbed toward the study, toward the evidence Nathan had died protecting, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I couldn't run. Not this time. The truth about our parents. Death was finally within reach. And this time, I was staying to fight for it. The pantry had always been Mom's domain, a place of comfort smells and childhood snacks. Now it felt like a trap, the walls pressing in as footsteps creaked overhead. Detective Morgan's breathing was steady beside me, her hand still on my arm. Professional, calculated. My own heart was threatening to burst from my chest. "They'll find the safe," I whispered, barely audible. "Let them." Her voice was equally soft. "We need to know what they know." A thunderous crash from upstairs made us both jump. "Found something," a voice called out. More footsteps, hurrying toward the study. Morgan's hand tightened on my arm. "When I say run, we go through the mudroom to the garage. My car's around the corner." I shook my head. "The evidence won't help anyone if we're dead." Her tone left no room for argument. Voices drifted down from above, excited but muffled. Then, clearly, "It's empty," followed by cursing, the sound of something being thrown. "Check the rest of the house," the gruff voice ordered. "Walker's kid has to have found it first. Nathan would have made sure of it." Morgan tensed beside me. Footsteps descended the stairs, slow and methodical. A shadow passed the pantry door once, twice. The handle began to turn. "Now!" Morgan burst through the door, shouldering the man aside. I followed, adrenaline making everything sharp and clear. The man recovered quickly, reaching for something inside his jacket. Morgan was faster. Her elbow caught him in the solar plexus, doubling him over. "Run!" We sprinted through the mudroom, past the dusty boots and abandoned coats that still hung like ghosts of our old life. Behind us, shouts and footsteps. A gun barked, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Something hot whispered past my ear. The garage door was locked. I slammed into it with my shoulder. Once, twice. It burst open and we tumbled through, the morning sun momentarily blinding after the darkness of the house. "Left," Morgan commanded, already running. Past the Andersons' house, another shot rang out. I ducked instinctively, following Morgan's lead as we cut through the neighbor's yard. Mrs. Anderson's prized roses were in bloom, their scent incongruously sweet as we crashed through them. She would have been horrified if she still lived here. Morgan's car was a dark sedan, engine already running. "Get in!" I dove into the passenger seat as more shots cracked behind us. Morgan floored it, tires screaming on the asphalt. In the side mirror, I saw our pursuers emerge onto the street, growing smaller as we accelerated away. "They won't follow," Morgan said, taking a sharp turn. "Too many witnesses out now." My hands were shaking as the adrenaline began to fade. The safe was empty. "That's what they said." Morgan checked her mirrors again. "But your brother was smarter than that. He would have moved whatever he found." "How did you know him?" The question had been nagging at me. "Before he came to you about the case." She was quiet for a moment, navigating through traffic. "I knew your parents. Your father came to me, about a month before he died, said he had evidence of corruption at the highest levels of the Chicago Financial Exchange. Asked me to protect his family if anything happened to him." The world seemed to tilt sideways. "What?" I failed. Her knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "And by the time I put the pieces together, they were dead, and you kids were in the wind. Nathan found me years later, said he'd discovered what your father had been investigating. We started building the case together. Why didn't he tell me? To protect you." She glanced at me. "You had a life in Boston, a career. He wanted you as far from this as possible." I laughed bitterly. "A fat lot of good that did, Alex." She pulled into a parking garage, cutting the engine. "Nathan left something for you the last time we met. Said if anything happened to him, I should give it to you. But only if you came looking for answers yourself." From her jacket, she withdrew an envelope, creased and worn like it had been carried for a long time. My name was written on it in Nathan's handwriting. "He said you'd know what it meant." She handed it to me. "Said it would lead you to the truth." Inside was a single sheet of paper, not a letter, as I'd expected, but a child's drawing, my drawing, from when I was maybe 7 or 8. It showed our family standing in front of a cabin by a lake. I remembered drawing it, remembered Mom hanging it on the fridge with pride. "The lake house," I breathed. "In Wisconsin." Morgan nodded. "Your father's fishing cabin." Nathan said that's where it all started, and that's where he hid everything he found. All the evidence, all the proof. The safe being empty wasn't a setback, I realized. It was a message. Nathan knew I'd remember the drawing, remember the cabin. Those men will figure it out too, eventually. Morgan started the car again. How fast can you pack? I looked at the drawing again, at the happy family I'd sketched in crayon so many years ago. I'm ready now. She pulled out of the garage, heading north. Wisconsin it is. As the city fell away behind us, I studied the drawing more closely. Something about it nagged at me, a detail I was missing. In the background, behind the cabin, I'd drawn what looked like a boathouse, but we'd never had a boathouse at the lake. Nathan had been leaving breadcrumbs all along, knowing I'd follow them. Now it was time to find out what he'd hidden in a place from our childhood, a place that held its own dark secrets. The lake appeared through the trees like a memory taking shape, dark water stretching to the horizon, early evening light painting the surface in shades of gold and purple. Morgan killed the headlights as we turned onto the gravel access road, letting momentum carry us the last quarter mile. No other cars, she noted, scanning the tree line. But that doesn't mean we're alone. I barely heard her. My attention was fixed on the cabin ahead, its weathered wood the color of old bones in the fading light. The last time I'd been here was the summer before our parents died. Dad had promised it would become a regular thing again, that he'd make more time for family. Another promise buried with him. Alex. Morgan's voice pulled me back to the present. We should check it out before we lose the light. The cabin's key was where it had always been, under a false rock beside the back step. Some things never changed, even when everything else did. Inside, dust sheets covered the furniture like shrouds. The air smelled of pine and disuse and something else. Recent cigarette smoke. Someone's been here, Morgan said, drawing her weapon. She moved through the cabin with practiced efficiency, checking corners and closets. Clear, but they'll be back. I went to the window that faced the lake. The boathouse from my childhood drawing stood at the water's edge, its reflection rippling in the dying light. But something was wrong with the perspective. It's bigger, I said, half to myself. What is? The boathouse. In my memory, in the drawing, it was smaller. I turned to Morgan. Dad built it himself when we were kids, but it's been expanded. Understanding dawned in her eyes. Recently, I was already moving, heading for the door. The path to the boathouse was overgrown, raspberry canes grabbing at my clothes. Behind me, Morgan's footsteps were nearly silent on the packed earth. The boathouse door was padlocked, but the hasp was new, incongruous against the weathered wood. Morgan produced a small tool from her pocket. Stand watch. While she worked on the lock, I scanned the growing darkness. The lake was silent except for the occasional call of a loon, but the hair on the back of my neck stood up, the same feeling I got in the OR when something was about to go wrong. The lock clicked open. Inside, the boathouse was a study in shadows, the last of the daylight filtering through grimy windows. A small rowboat was tied to the inner dock, gently bumping against the weathered planks. There, Morgan's flashlight beam caught something on the far wall. And behind those shelves, we moved closer. The shelving unit was built into the wall, filled with old life jackets and fishing gear. But the edge of one shelf showed signs of frequent movement. The dust pattern interrupted. Help me pull, Morgan said, gripping one side. Together, we heaved. The entire unit swung out like a door, revealing a narrow space behind it. My breath caught. The hidden room was small, maybe 6 feet square. One wall was covered in papers and photographs, connected by string like something from a crime show. In the center was a laptop, surrounded by external hard drives, and on a small table, a thick manila envelope with my name on it. Nathan's evidence, Morgan breathed. Everything he collected about your parents, death, the financial exchange, all of it. I reached for the envelope, but Morgan's hand shot out, stopping me. Hey, listen. From outside came the crunch of tires on gravel. Back door, Morgan whispered, gesturing to a small door on the lakeside of the boathouse. There's a trail that leads. The sound of footsteps on the dock cut her off. Multiple sets, approaching from both directions. Detective Morgan, a familiar voice called out. The man from the warehouse in Boston. Dr. Walker, I know you're in there. Let's handle this professionally. Morgan's expression was grim in the fading light. Take what you can carry, she whispered. I'll buy you time. I'm not leaving you. This isn't a debate. She pressed a set of keys into my hand. My cabin, 3 miles north on Lake Road. Get there and call the number in my phone under insurance. They'll extract you. Before I could argue, she moved to the main door, weapon ready. Coming out, she called. Don't do anything stupid. I grabbed the envelope with my name and as many hard drives as I could stuff in my pockets. The laptop would have to stay. Morgan looked back at me once, nodding slightly. Then she opened the door, hands raised. Evening, gentlemen. Lovely night for a swim. I heard the man's response, something about taking her in for questioning. Then Morgan's voice again, loud and clear. You might want to check your boat. A splash from outside, followed by cursing. Morgan must have untied their boat while we were talking. In the confusion, I slipped out the back door and into the gathering darkness. The trail was barely visible, but my feet remembered the way. Behind me, voices rose in anger, followed by the sound of pursuit. I ran, the envelope clutched to my chest, Morgan's keys digging into my palm. The truth about our parents was in my hands, but at what cost? And what would I find when I finally opened that envelope? Moonlight filtered through the trees as I ran, turning the forest into a maze of silver and shadow. The lake trail was treacherous, roots and rocks threatening to trip me with every step. Behind me, flashlight beams cut through the darkness, voices calling out directions. They were getting closer. My surgical training had taught me to think clearly under pressure, to make split-second decisions when lives hung in the balance. But this was different. This was primal, heart-pounding, lungs burning, every rustle of leaves making me flinch. The envelope and hard drives felt like lead weights in my jacket. Morgan's keys dug into my palm, a constant reminder of her sacrifice. Why had she stayed behind? What didn't she tell me about her connection to all this? A branch snapped nearby. Too close. I veered off the trail, pushing through thick undergrowth. The moon disappeared behind clouds, plunging the forest into darkness. I stumbled, caught myself against a tree. Its bark was rough under my hands, grounding me in reality. That's when I heard it, water lapping against rocks. I'd wandered too close to the shoreline. The lake stretched out to my right, a black void in the darkness. To my left, flashlight beams swept the forest. I was being herded. He's headed for the point, someone shouted. Cut him off at the Narrows. They knew these woods better than I did. The thought hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a random chase. They'd planned for this. Probably had people stationed around the lake waiting for us. My foot caught a root, and I went down hard, the envelope tucked against my chest, cushioning my fall. As I pushed myself up, something scratched my hand. Not a branch, but metal. A chain-link fence, nearly invisible in the darkness. Memory struck like lightning. Dad's voice. The water treatment plant is just past our property. Stay away from that fence, boys. It's dangerous. Nathan and I had spent hours theorizing about what was really behind it, spinning childhood fantasies about secret government facilities. Now, breathing hard in the dark forest, I wondered if those fantasies had been closer to truth than we knew. The fence stretched into the darkness in both directions. To my right, it ran down to the water. To my left, up into the woods where my pursuers were searching. But there, barely visible, a gap where the metal had been cut and pulled back. Recent cut. Clean edges. Nathan had been here. I squeezed through the gap, feeling the sharp edges of metal snag my jacket. Beyond the fence, the ground sloped down toward a complex of low buildings, their outlines barely visible in the darkness. Security lights cast pools of harsh illumination, but between them were deeper shadows. A shout went up behind me. They'd found the gap in the fence. I ran, staying in the shadows, trying to remember everything Nathan had taught me about moving quietly during our childhood games of hide and seek. The hard drives bounced against my ribs with each step. The nearest building had a keypad lock, its red LED glowing in the darkness. Next to it was a sign, Chicago Financial Exchange, Secure Data Storage Facility, B. This was never about money laundering, I whispered, understanding finally dawning. Dad found something in their data, something they'd killed to keep hidden. My phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. Loading dock, East Side, 3 minutes. Morgan. It had to be. But how? More shouts from the forest. They'd spread out, searching methodically. I pressed myself against the wall of the building, inching toward the corner. The loading dock was there. A large roll-up door closed for the night. Something moved in the shadows. I froze. Alex. Morgan's voice, barely a whisper. She emerged from behind a dumpster, looking battered but alive. Brought some friends. A dark van pulled up to the loading dock, its headlights off. The side door slid open silently. FBI, Morgan explained as we ran for the van. Your father's real evidence was never in the lake house. That was just where he discovered what they were hiding here. Nathan figured it out, used the lake house to draw them out. But this facility, this is where the real answers are. Flashlights appeared at the tree line. A shout went up. "Move!" Morgan pushed me toward the van. "We've got what we need to get a warrant, but only if we make it out of here." I dove into the van, Morgan right behind me. As it accelerated away, bullets pinged off its armored sides. Through the back window, I watched the facility disappear into the darkness, its secrets still locked away. But in my hands, I held Nathan's envelope, and with it, I hoped, the key to understanding why our family had been torn apart. "A time to see what your brother died protecting," Morgan said softly. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. The FBI safe house was a nondescript apartment in downtown Milwaukee, 20 stories up with a view of the lake. Dawn was breaking over the water, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed obscenely beautiful given what I was reading. Nathan's evidence was spread across the dining room table: documents, photographs, and printouts from the hard drives. Morgan sat across from me, her face grim as I worked through the files. 2 FBI agents stood guard by the door, while others came and went, speaking in hushed tones. "Dad wasn't just an accountant for the Chicago Financial Exchange," I said, my voice hoarse. "He was building a case against them. Years of evidence." Morgan nodded. "The exchange was just a front. The real operation was at that data facility. They were selling financial information, market predictions, insider trading on a massive scale. Your father discovered their algorithm." I picked up a photograph, Dad in his office, looking tired but determined. The timestamp showed it was taken just days before his death. He knew they were going to kill him. "Yes." Morgan pushed another document toward me. This was his insurance policy. Everything he'd collected, everything he'd found. He gave a copy to Nathan the day before the accident. Nathan was only 18. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Dad trusted him with all of this, but he didn't tell me anything. "He was protecting you." Morgan's voice was gentle. "You were 16, about to start college. He wanted you to have a normal life." I laughed bitterly. How'd that work out? The next document made my blood run cold. It was a police report, not about my parents' accident, but about another crash 2 weeks earlier. A family of 4, all dead when their car went off the same road. Dad had highlighted certain passages, made notes in the margins. "They were practicing," I whispered, the truth finally clicking into place. The other accident was a test run. Dad figured it out, knew he was next, but he couldn't prove it in time. Nathan spent years putting the pieces together. Morgan pulled out a notebook, Nathan's handwriting, pages of meticulous notes. He traced the money, found witnesses, built the case Dad had started, but he needed access to the data facility to prove it. That's why he came back to the lake house. My hands shook as I opened the final folder. Inside was a letter, addressed to me in Nathan's familiar scrawl. "Alex, if you're reading this, I'm probably dead. I'm sorry, not for investigating, but for keeping you in the dark. I told myself I was protecting you, just like Dad tried to protect us. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe secrets are what destroyed our family in the first place. The truth is in the numbers. Alex, Dad found a pattern in the market crashes, the accidents, the convenient deaths. The algorithm didn't just predict market movements. It predicted who would be a threat, who needed to be eliminated. Dad was on their list. Now I am too. But we have a chance to end this. The evidence is all here, the witnesses, the money trails, everything they tried to bury. Morgan has copies of everything, and there's more hidden in the data facility. A federal judge is standing by with a warrant as soon as we have probable cause. I know you think I blamed you for running away after Mom and Dad died. I didn't. You were just a kid, same as me. We were both running, me into the investigation, you into medicine. Maybe we were both looking for ways to save people we couldn't save. I love you, little brother. Whatever happens, remember, the truth matters. It's worth dying for. But more importantly, it's worth living for. Nathan. I set the letter down carefully, aware of the tears on my face but not bothering to wipe them away. Outside, the sun had fully risen, a new day dawning over Lake Michigan, the same lake that had witnessed so many of our family's secrets. "What happens now?" I asked Morgan. She was about to answer when her phone buzzed. The message made her sit up straight. They found something in the sweep of the data facility, a hidden server room, decades of backed-up data. The warrant just came through. They'll destroy everything, I said, standing. As soon as they know we're coming. Morgan smiled grimly. That's why we're not waiting. Teams are moving in now. She stood, checking her weapon. Want to see this through? I looked at Nathan's letter one last time, then carefully folded it and put it in my pocket. Yes, Alex. She caught my arm. It's not over. The people behind this, they won't go down easily. I know. I thought of the operating room, of holding Nathan's life in my hands and failing to save him. Not this time. But I'm done running. Outside, sirens began to wail in the distance. The endgame was beginning. The data facility looked different in daylight, less mysterious, more mundane. FBI vehicles surrounded the perimeter, their lights flashing silently against the morning sun. Agents in tactical gear moved with practiced efficiency, securing exits, checking windows. From our position in the command vehicle, Morgan and I watched the operation unfold. They're not resisting, she noted, frowning. That's not right. She was right. The facility staff had surrendered immediately, offering no resistance as agents led them out in handcuffs. No one had tried to destroy evidence. No one had fought back. It was too easy. The server room, I said suddenly. Nathan's letter mentioned backed-up data going back decades. Where is it? Morgan was already moving, barking orders into her radio. We followed a team into the building, through sterile corridors that reminded me unnervingly of a hospital. The server room was in the basement. Of course it was. Everything important in my family's story seemed to happen underground. The room was massive, rows of servers stretching into the shadows. Cooling fans hummed. LEDs blinked like artificial stars. A technician was working at a terminal, his fingers flying over the keyboard. FBI, step away from the console. The tech raised his hand slowly, turning to face us. My blood ran cold. It was the man from the warehouse in Boston. He smiled, not looking surprised to see me. Dr. Walker, right on schedule. Step away, Morgan repeated, her weapon trained on him. Now. Oh, I don't think so. He gestured to the screen behind him. You see, your brother was clever, very clever. But he made one crucial mistake. He assumed we didn't know he'd found us. Numbers scrolled across the screen, cascading like digital rain. With horror, I recognized the pattern from Nathan's notes. The algorithm. What did you do? I demanded. We let him think he was winning. Let him gather his evidence. Build his case. All while we fed him exactly what we wanted him to see. His smile widened. Just like we did with your father. Morgan stepped forward. Last warning. Step away from the console. The algorithm doesn't just predict markets, he continued, ignoring her. It predicts people. Their behaviors, their breaking points. Your father reached his when we threatened his family. Nathan reached his when he thought he'd found the truth. And you, Alex. He laughed softly. You reached yours the moment Nathan died on your table. You're wrong, I said, but doubt crept in. Had every move I'd made been predicted, calculated, controlled? The evidence Nathan gathered. He gestured at the scrolling data. Fabricated. The witnesses? Paid off? Even Detective Morgan here. Did you never wonder why she was so conveniently available to help? I looked at Morgan. She met my eyes steadily, her weapon never wavering. He's trying to get in your head, Alex, just like they did with Nathan. Am I? The tech's fingers moved slightly on the keyboard. Check your phone, Detective. The one in your left pocket. Morgan tensed. Alex, don't listen. The burner phone, I realized. The one you used to text me at the lake house. You said you'd brought FBI backup, but they weren't FBI, were they? Alex, the real FBI raid is happening right now, the tech said, at a different facility. One where they'll find nothing but old financial records and minor trading violations. This, he gestured around us. This is something else entirely. My world was spinning. You killed my parents. Nathan, all those people. We restored order, he corrected. The markets require stability. Your father threatened that stability. Nathan, too. Some people can't accept that the world needs structure, control. He looked at me almost pityingly. The question is, what kind of person are you, Alex? He's the kind who saves lives, Morgan said quietly. Then she shot him. The tech stumbled back, red blooming on his shoulder, but he was laughing as he fell, his hand hitting a final key on the keyboard. Alarms began to blare. Around us, servers started to whine, their cooling fans spinning faster and faster. Deletion protocol initiated, a computerized voice announced. Total system purge in 5 minutes. No! Morgan rushed to the terminal, but the screen was already going dark. Years of evidence disappearing into the digital void. "You can't stop it," the tech gasped, still laughing. "The truth dies here, just like your brother. Just like your—" I hit him. Not a surgical strike, por us, but a raw, angry blow that sent him sprawling. "Morgan, can you stop it?" She was typing frantically. "The deletion's spreading through the system. We need a master override, but—" She cursed. "The authentication's biometric. We need him." I looked at the tech, unconscious now on the floor, then at the servers, whirring faster as they consumed themselves. 5 minutes to save the truth about our family, about all the families they'd destroyed. Time to stop running. "I'm a doctor," I said, kneeling beside the tech. "I can wake him up." Morgan met my eyes. In them, I saw understanding, and something else. Trust. "Do it." Outside, sirens wailed. The clock was ticking. 4 minutes. The servers screamed around us, fans spinning at catastrophic speeds as they worked to erase decades of carefully guarded secrets. The tech lay unconscious at my feet, blood seeping from his shoulder wound. Morgan stood at the terminal, trying to slow the deletion, but her face told me it was hopeless without the override. I pulled a small bottle from my pocket, smelling salts from the medical kit in Morgan's car. Old surgical habits die hard. As I waved them under the tech's nose, his eyes fluttered. "Wake up," I said, my voice steady. "We need that override." He laughed weakly. "You still don't understand. Even if you stop the deletion, you've lost. The algorithm predicted everything," I finished. "My father's investigation, Nathan's evidence, my choices, every move we'd make, every step we'd take. Because that's what algorithms do. They find patterns. 3 minutes. But you know what they can't predict." I leaned closer. "The moment someone breaks the pattern." His eyes narrowed. "What are you—" "You said my breaking point was Nathan dying on my table. But that's where you're wrong." I pulled Nathan's letter from my pocket. "I broke long before that, the night our parents died. I ran away, let Nathan carry the burden alone. That was my pattern. Running, hiding, trying to save everyone except the people who mattered most. 2 minutes. But patterns can change. People can change." I stood, pulling the tech up with me. Nathan knew that. It's why he left the evidence where he did, why he made sure I'd have to come home to find it. Not because he needed me to finish the investigation, but because he needed me to finish growing up. The tech's laugh turned into a cough, very touching. "But the deletion will erase your evidence, but not the truth." I gestured at the screaming servers. "The algorithm predicted markets, identified threats, calculated who needed to die to maintain a stability, but it missed something crucial." "And what's that?" He was trying to sound dismissive, but fear had crept into his voice. 1 minute. "The human factor. Why do you think I became a trauma surgeon? Because in the OR, when someone's life hangs by a thread, all the algorithms in the world can't predict what will happen. Only human choice matters. The choice to fight, to heal, to save." I met his eyes. "My father chose to fight for the truth, knowing it would kill him. Nathan chose to sacrifice everything to finish what Dad started. Now it's my turn to choose." The tech's face had gone pale, either from blood loss or realization. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" I smiled, and saw in his eyes that he recognized the expression, the same one Nathan must have worn when he finally confronted them. "The thing about patterns is, once you see them, you can't unsee them. Like the pattern of accidents and that followed your cleanup operations, or the pattern of shell companies that funded them. Nathan found those patterns, and he made copies. Impossible. We tracked every digital copy, every paper trail. But did your algorithm predict he'd hide the evidence in plain sight? Encoded in medical records, scattered through hospitals across the country." I leaned closer. "I'm a doctor. Those records are protected by law, and I've spent the last 3 years building a network of colleagues who owe me favors." 30 seconds. The tech's facade cracked. "You're lying. Maybe. But can your algorithm predict what I'll do next? Can it calculate the risk of letting all that evidence go public against the risk of stopping this deletion?" I gestured to his wounded shoulder. "I can save your life, or I can let you bleed while we watch your life's work destroy itself. Your choice." He stared at me for a long moment. Then, slowly, he raised his hand to the terminal's biometric scanner. "Override accepted," the computer announced. "A deletion protocol suspended." Morgan's fingers flew over the keyboard, securing the data. Around us, the servers began to quiet. their fans slowing to a normal hum. "You know they'll never stop coming after you," the tech said as I began treating his shoulder. "Let them come." I thought of Nathan's letter, safely stored with Sarah in Boston, of the evidence hidden in medical records across the country, waiting to be assembled, of the pattern that had finally been broken. Some things are worth fighting for. Morgan called in her team, and I watched as they led the tech away. Outside, the sun had risen fully, its light streaming through the high windows of the facility. In its glare, the servers looked less ominous. Just machines, after all. Not gods or oracles, just tools, as good or evil as the people who wielded them. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Heard about the raid. You okay?" I looked at Morgan, who nodded. "Go home, Alex. We've got this covered." Home. For the first time in years, I knew where that was. Not running away, not hiding in operating rooms and comfortable lies. Home was where the truth lived, in all its messy, painful glory. "On my way," I texted back. As I walked out of the facility, I could have sworn I felt them with me. Mom and Dad, Nathan, all the ghosts I'd been running from. But they weren't chasing me anymore. They were walking beside me, into the light of a new day. Sometimes the hardest truth to face isn't about conspiracy, or corruption, or even death. It's the truth about ourselves, who we are, who we've been, who we choose to become. I chose to stop running. I chose to live in the light. The end. Thanks for watching to the end. What did you think of this story? Let us know in the comments below. We value your opinion. Click the like button if you enjoyed it, and be sure to subscribe to receive more captivating stories. Activate the bell so that you're always the first to know when a new video is published. See you next time.